Welcome to the third session, check, of the 2023 Words, Ideas, and Thinkers Festival. My name is Lynn Bolger, and I am the Executive Director of the Authors Guild Foundation, and I will get Anthony fired if I don't remind you that in an emergency, please go to the nearest red exit sign and let yourself out, and hopefully we'll get this feedback under control. It's my great pleasure to thank our amazing partners, and I will name them. Stoneover Farm has been an amazing partner to the WIT Festival, housing our speakers and throwing a fabulous party for us last night. Berkshire Magazine dedicates 4 to 6 pages of every issue to WIT coverage year-round. The Red Lion Inn, the Berkshire Eagle, another media partner, Whistler's Inn, the bookstore in Lenox, Wine and Spirits, yay! Our favorite booksellers, Wine and Spirits Magazine, they donate wine to us, Mahawi Theater, and the Norman Rockwell Museum, so I thank you all. We love you. Here today, everybody who got a ticket today's talk, was informed that Jonathan Taplin, alas, got COVID. And people said to me, how did you possibly fill in his spot with somebody like Stephen Levy at the drop of a hat? And Stephen Levy was going to introduce this session, so somebody up there was looking out for us. Stephen is the author of 8 books and Wired's editor-at-large. Oh, and hey, I want to give a shout out to all of the high school kids up there from the Lenox High. Yeah. Thanks for coming. We're so glad you're here. So back to Stephen. For almost 4 decades, Stephen has chronicled the digital revolution and its impact on humanity and the people behind it. He has written the foundational work on computer culture, Hackers in 1984, and with Crypto 2001, the indispensable book on the story behind that groundbreaking technology, years before people started yakking about crypto and Bitcoin and blockchain, whatever those things are. Mm-hmm. He has written the definitive books on Facebook, Google, the Macintosh, and the iPod. World-class engineers tell him that they pursued AI after reading his 1992 book, Artificial Life, and he currently covers the breadth of tech stories, the good, the bad, the ugly, for Wired magazine, where he has been a contributor since its inception. Among his honors, PC Magazine named Hackers the best sci-tech book written in the last 20 years. It reads like a thriller. Crypto won the Grand eBook Prize at the 2001 Frankfurt Book Fair. In the Plex, the book on Google, was Amazon's best business book of 2011. In 2008, he was inducted as an SV Forum Visionary, along with Reed Hastings and Diane Green. He has won several Computer Press Association awards and been a finalist for the National Magazine Award. Please welcome Stephen Levy. Interviewing him is my boss, the eminently qualified Mary Rasenberger. She is the Chief Executive Officer of both the Authors Guild and the Authors Guild Foundation. Prior to joining the Guild in November 2014, she practiced for over 25 years law in the areas of intellectual property, media, and tech. So, Mary, take it away.
Thank you, Lynn. And Lynn thanked everybody else for your help on the WIT Festival, and I want to just add my thanks to that, but also a huge thanks to Lynn and to Nikki Maniscalco, who have done so much to make this happen. We were disappointed that John couldn't make it, had COVID, but we are so lucky to have Stephen Levy with us here. Stephen is known as the premier tech journalist in the country, and that is without a doubt. Long before I came to the Guild and got to know Stephen, I think I had read many, if not most, of his books. So incredibly pleased to be talking to Stephen today. So Stephen, you have been covering technology since the early 1980s, 40 years. What drew you to this field? And I'd love to hear a little bit about how the field of technology journalism has changed over these years.
Well, sure, yeah. But first I want to also express my appreciation for you folks letting me fill in. I was going to be in Lynn's position to introduce it. And especially on the stage here at Shakespeare and Company as a Berkshire homeowner, Berkshire County homeowner, I've seen some amazing productions here, and it's an honor to be on the stage. So I came to technology from a weird method. You know, Jane Fonda is actually responsible for my becoming a tech writer. I was a writer about many things. I had been, working, teaching myself how to write magazine stories and columns, and I was living in New York City, where I had just moved and starting to write for national magazines, and had never touched the computer when my wife's former editor, a woman named Susan Line, who used to work at the Village Voice, who is now working for Jane Fonda, came up with this project where, because so many magazine articles were being made into movies, that this movie production company thought, why don't we find good ideas and we'll get a writer to write things for a magazine, and then we'll pre-option it for a movie. So she said, I'd like you, Stephen, to write about this weird phenomenon people call computer hackers. And at the time, that was not a familiar term to anyone. And as I said, I'd never touched the computer, and computer hackers were known as these strange people, kind of losers, who would sit behind a screen and gobble peanut butter, chocolate bars, and Fritos, and do things that no one understood. And I thought, okay, I'll document this weird subculture. I went to California and was utterly blown away by what I saw. They weren't losers. They were people who were ahead of all of us. They were doing creative things on those keyboards, and I sensed they had their hand on the future. And I wrote the story and was so excited about the whole subject that I kept writing about it. I did the story for Rolling Stone, and wound up writing the story about the Macintosh as it launched for Rolling Stone, and then did a book about hackers, which worked out pretty well. Jane Fonda never made the movie, though. But we did go with her producer, Bruce Gilbert and Susan, to MIT, where they had hooked up with Marvin Minsky, who was a pioneer of artificial intelligence, which I think we're going to talk about a little. And I met Marvin, who is an amazing person, and his living room was sort of the salon for the future, and spent time there. So that was amazing. So your question about how things change, when I started writing about technology, these companies were just starting, and they were so accessible. I remember the first time I went to Microsoft, it was 1984, and everyone had heard about the Silicon Valley of the Northwest, and Microsoft anchored it. So I just called up the company and said, yeah, I'm coming up there. And they said, great. And they gave me a day where I'd spend the morning talking to Steve Ballmer, who later became the CEO. And then in the afternoon, I went in to see Bill Gates, who I'd interviewed for Hackers. And I spent like a couple hours. He was like decked out on a little couch in his office, kind of assuming the fetal position and rocking back and forth. And just talking and talking and talking.
What year was this?
What 1984. 1984. And later on, you would go there to his office, and it would be like scheduled to the max, to the second, and someone had to do a thumbprint to get into the office suite, and it was so different. And you can't now talk to someone in a technology company, even someone at the lowest level, without a PR person sitting in to the discussion there. So Also, the narrative changed. The overwhelming narrative in the early days was David and Goliath, right? These are, young rebels taking on the empire. And the Rolling Stone story I wrote, I think it was, the rebels take on the empire. The empire then was IBM, so it was Apple, taking on IBM. And the narrative now is more like Icarus. They flew too close to the sun. They were overwhelmed with hubris, and now it's time to critique them and see, maybe all the things they did weren't so great.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, in the 90s, early 2000s, everybody thought, oh, the tech sector was so cool, everything they did was so cool. I remember working in the copyright field, even during the Obama administration. It was like whatever Google wanted was just so cool and wonderful, and we could not get the administration or Congress to think about maybe we shouldn't let these companies get so big. Maybe actually our antitrust laws, should come into play. So it's and now that whole kind of storyline has changed quite a bit.
Yeah, I remember when I did the Google book. That was during the election where Obama came. Obama was up for president, and he went to Google, and it was a mind meld, and a lot of people in Google, some people left Google to work for him and help get him elected, and there were a lot of people who joined his administration. I remember I went to one of the big inauguration parties thrown by Google for Obama. And
I was there too.
Oh, really? I didn't see you there.
Funny.
And I remember that because a couple weeks before I went to a party in Silicon Valley thrown by this place called Y Combinator, which is an incubator for startups. And these two weird people came up to me because I had been talking about how difficult it was to find a place to stay for inauguration, and saying, oh, we've got a new company. We'd like to offer you a chance to sleep on somebody's couch during the thing. And they were the founders of Airbnb, of course.
And Uber, I think, also started that weekend.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't get cabs.
Right. Yeah, that was early on, right? And they started because of the iPhone. And I said, no, I think my wife and I will, figure out something besides the couch.
Well, Stephen, you've had unlimited access to the most powerful leaders in tech, including Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, the Google founders, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and of course Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, as well as Bill Gates. Just wonder, is there anybody that you haven't spoken to yet or gotten to know that you would like to?
Well, actually, it's funny. The one person we just mentioned him, the one interview that I really wanted to have was Obama while he was in office. And I kept, calling for Wired. And then in 2014, I left Wired for a couple of years and joined Medium because I wanted to build something after all these years of writing about internet companies. I had a chance to join one. And while I was away at Wired, all the connections I made led to Wired having Obama be a guest editor of an issue of Wired. So I missed out on my chance there. Everyone else, I pretty much gotten to. I always made it a point, even though, I had these great relationships with the early people in the PC era, like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, to, connect with people. When I heard about this company called Facebook, I, made an appointment to talk to them. In Google, when at the first moment I saw the search engine, I called up their PR person and said, I want to meet these people. It was 1999, and I remember it was Halloween because when I visited the Googleplex, which is one building then, Larry was dressed as a Viking and Sergey was dressed as a cow. So I interviewed the cow and the Viking about how search engines work. And so I've been pretty lucky to talk to everybody, and now my reputation precedes me, so it's a little easier.
Yeah. You're one of the few reporters that spoke to Steve Jobs a lot. He was, it seemed like he was always happy to talk to you. Why was he special? And I'm dying to know if he ever got angry with you during any interviews.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, for all his, foibles and flaws, had this grasp of what the technology could do, and he saw the broader picture. He knew a little engineering, but he wasn't really like an engineer, hacker at core. That was his partner, Steve Wozniak. But I remember the first time I talked to him, he talked to me how technology and liberal arts were on a first date. And, it's really going to cement into something big. And he never left that vision. And he was just so audacious that he made things happen that, people thought wouldn't happen. It happened with the Microsoft to make computers, which were so hard to use back then, something very easier to use. And he was able to take stuff that had been happening in research labs and figure out how to commercialize it and make it, got what was then a pretty low price. So to extend the use of this really difficult to use technology. I remember the first time I bought an Apple II, we needed a consultant, to help us figure out how to use it. That's what you do back then, or there were these magazines, like I wrote a column for one. When you bought a computer, you had to get like a subscription to a magazine to tell you how to use it, right? And after Steve Jobs and the graphical user interface, you didn't need that anymore, right? And those magazines, aren't around, or they're greatly changed. And he had this focus when he came back at Apple. He knew exactly what he wanted to do to salvage the company that had gone astray during the time, between the time he was fired and the time in 1985 and the time he came back in 1997. And he really changed our lives. To your other question, yeah, he would get mad at me. I remember, when he was mad at you, he'd just call you up no matter what time. I remember once he called my house at 11 o'clock. I wasn't home. My son picked up the phone, and he said yes. And Steve immediately starts yelling at him, and because I had written, I think that Steve was on the wrong side of history. I was correct. I was saying about the iPhone should be opened up to outside developers to write native apps, and as it turns out, he had come around to that, and though I hadn't gone public with it, but he wanted to scream at me for writing that. He was mad, and he was screaming at my son, who was looking at the phone, and finally he said, "Well, I think you mean my dad." And he said, "Well, you sound like him," and he hung up.
How old was your son?
Back then, he was around, I guess, maybe 16 or must have been 17 because the iPhone was out. Yeah.
Yeah, he probably loves telling that story now.
Yeah.
So Facebook, that's your most recent book, is Facebook, The Inside Story. And you had unprecedented access to Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg. I think, did you spend something like 3 years working on that book?
Yeah, it took 3 years, yeah.
Yeah, and the tagline on the publisher's site is, to understand Meta, you must read Facebook, The Inside Story. So I have a few questions about that book and maybe, what you learned about Facebook.
Yeah, this isn't the book, by the way.
This is not the book, yeah. I wish we...
In honor of John, we're looking...
Yeah, but do we have copies of it here? Probably not, since this was last minute, but... Yeah, but it's
available on all your favorite independent bookstore.
So can you tell us a little bit about that and also why Facebook changed to Meta, and what's the Metaverse? What's that all about?
Sure, yeah, no, the story of Facebook is amazing. It starts literally in a dorm room, and by a very ambitious builder, Mark Zuckerberg, unusual person, and I sort of got into who he was. I talked to his parents, and when I set up the arrangement for the book, which was, I would get cooperation from Facebook and the people in it, and get to talk to whoever I wanted. The people who I wanted to interview, they had the option, not to talk to me, I guess, but I talked to pretty much everyone and had frequent talks with Zuckerberg. And I started in the end of the summer 2016, and a few months later, the whole narrative changed after the election in 2016 when Donald Trump was elected, and people started pointing the finger at Facebook, for all the things. So I wound up writing a different book than I thought I'd write. On the cover of the book is when you see it, and winds up in your inbox after you order it from your favorite independent bookstore.
Which you're doing this afternoon, by the way.
Yeah, the people taking the picture, they cast the letter F in clay or whatever, and they dropped it, and you can see the shattered F, the symbol of Facebook. Fortunately, they didn't throw me out. I got to report it all the way through, and you could see in real time, really, how decisions made very early on in the company's history to move fast and break things, as the term was, came back to haunt them. So it was a fascinating experience. How they became Meta is really interesting as well. In 2014, I believe, Mark Zuckerberg saw a demo from a company called Oculus, which was making a low-cost virtual reality headset. And he hadn't been exposed much to virtual reality, though. It's a technology that had been trying to break through for a long time. I remember I wrote a story in 1990 for Rolling Stone about the coming thing, virtual reality, and it hadn't come. And but he saw the future of computers in virtual reality. He believed the next paradigm shift in computing would be virtual reality. And when you talk about a paradigm shift, is I've covered a bunch of them. Is like the personal computer was one, the graphical user interface was one, mobile technology was another. You could argue that social networking was another. And Facebook had a near-death experience when mobile technology came along. They were geared for the web. And at the time, that was the cutting-edge thing to write on. But with mobile technology, they had to rethink everything, particularly their business model. And they had a tough time. They got through it very successfully. But he said, I never want to be caught that way again. So the next technology comes along. I want to be ahead of it, and I want to own it. I want to be the one place where we're far ahead of it. So he buys the company for $2 billion, right? A purchase that never would have gone through these days when Facebook is under a lot of antitrust scrutiny. And after all the problems they had, Zuckerberg still believed in it, in, I think it was maybe 2018. I forget the exact year. No, it was after my book, so it must have been 2020, after the book came out, where he decided, we're going to change our name to Meta. And I think in a way he was sort of changing the subject because Facebook was under such criticism that he wanted to, kind of get past that. And and he wanted to focus on the metaverse. He felt that, he could make it happen now. And he was interested in, the metaverse as a social thing to take over from where Facebook is and Instagram and, and its other properties. They've got 4 of the biggest 10 social networks in the world. But that hasn't happened, right? In this metaverse is some world where we're going to enter, just by putting these immersive headsets on. And it turns out people don't want these things on their head for hours at a time. If you look at their technology, it's great for short term to play a really fun game, but it's not something that even when you want to take a meeting with everyone's sitting there with their headsets, and some people might be remote, and other people might be in a room with someone with a headset, and and it's kind of interesting. They have a big conference coming up about their metaverse products next week, and they're introducing their new headset. They sort of pre-announced it because Apple introduced a headset, and they didn't want to let people know too long that they don't have their own coming up. And I think they're going to emphasize less social things now on the thing. And since they announced Meta, the artificial intelligence explosion has come, and I think Mark Zuckerberg now is talking a little less about the metaverse and more about AI, because that's what everyone in Silicon Valley has to talk about now.
Right, yeah. Thanks. So just to plug John Taplin's book, which is here, since he's not here, he does in this book, he talks about 4 tech leaders who are creating alternative realities for us. One of them is Mark Zuckerberg, also Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Mark Anderson. And he talks about how Zuckerberg really believes that in 10, 15 years, none of us are going to have jobs anymore because AI will have taken over our jobs, and we won't have a lot to do. So he thinks, at least this is his spiel, I think, to investors and others, we're going to be spending 7 hours a day in the metaverse. And maybe this shows my age, but I'm just like, why? Who would want to do that? Why? Why does somebody want to be in virtual reality? And is that something that's actually going to happen? I mean, I know
Right.
John presents a somewhat dystopian future based on the vision these 4 men have for us in the future, which kind of leaves humanity, I think, and the soul a little behind. But then he would want me to say he also ends on a positive note that we have a sort of mini revolution going. So I just want to, it's actually a great book. So, but can you, it's a wonderful book. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? Like, is this a real thing? Are we
Right.
really going to be spending all this time in virtual reality instead of like going outside and going for walks and
Yeah,
enjoying
yeah.
nature, reading books?
Right. Well, to be fair, I don't think, Meta is saying we're not going to have jobs. I mean, some of the other people in this book, I think, are going to be saying that. And so maybe Sam Altman is. That's why Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, has been really interested in, a basic income for people because we won't have jobs in AI. Zuckerberg thinks we're going to have jobs, but, we'll probably be working them with headsets, which won't be immersive the headsets necessarily, but might be glasses we put on, which are able to beam images to our eyes. And it won't just be the immersive virtual reality, but the less immersive augmented reality, where we'll be wearing these glasses and we'll see a digital layer of things superimposed. So instead of, and Apple's adopted this idea too, that instead of sitting at a physical desk, with a screen in front of you, I could be sitting here on this stage. There's no desk here, and there's certainly no computer here. But I could say, "Oh, wait a minute! You said something, Mary. I'm going to go on the web, and my hands will move, and I'll look at a big screen, and and I'll be able to maybe it might be semi-transparent, so I'll be able to see the audience while I do this, but also look at the screen and then correct myself the date of something happening there." Or maybe we won't be here in beautiful Berkshire County, but we'll be somewhere else, and the audience will be sitting here with their screens showing us on stage, right? So I think there's something to that. There's something to like in the movie Minority Report, where they walk around and information about people is set up, and when you're at a cocktail party, someone will show up, and facial recognition has its own drawbacks, and people are careful about that. But I forget someone's name who I met before, and it'll remind me that while this person, and ask about their recent art show or whatever. There's kind of a future in that, but
I could use that.
yeah. So I think it's a technology that these companies want its time to be here, but it may not have come yet. It's one of those things that every 5 years, people say it's 5 years out, right? And there's been a number of technologies like that. I remember there's this guy named Kai-Fu Lee, a great computer scientist, who's written some great books. And he would talk about voice recognition, and how computers could understand language. And I remember talking to him in the 1990s, and he would say, I would ask him, well, I'm sitting here with a tape recorder. Back then it was a cassette recorder, and I'm taking this conversation, and I have to send it out to a transcriber. It's going to cost me $100 to transcribe this conversation. And he said, well, don't worry. Sooner, in 5 years, the conversation will be transcribed automatically. It'll be like great. And 5 years later, it's still 5 years away. 5 years later, same thing. And then all of a sudden, that happens. Right now, I have a digital tape recorder. I can use my phone. I tape everything, and I send it to a service called Otter, and in 15 minutes, the transcript, that's pretty darn good, shows up, and I can listen to it and correct little mistakes or blanks, but it does as well almost as a human transcriber. So these 5-year out things come true.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, things have changed so fast, and I think we sometimes even we get so used to them so quickly, and we forget what life was like before them. We were in the green room talking about, how did we ever get around without cell phones in the old days? How did we meet each other? How did we find each other? How did we, it's my kids ask me that too.
Like, but not to be okay boomered, but to talk about to the these students here from Lenox, sometimes they could ask their parents or grandparents about how they did things there, and they're shocked, right? I remember I went on a trip in 2007 with a bunch of young Google leaders. We went around the world and to different Google offices, and one night we were talking, and I was describing to them how I'd write stories before I touched the computer. In the 1970s, I would write a magazine story, and you would put the paper into your typewriter, you'd scroll it in, you'd type it, and you'd get to the end, and then you'd do the next draft, page 1, look at the other one, do it, and and then maybe you'd want to change something. You wouldn't want to type the whole thing again, so you'd use the scissors and cut out a paragraph and paste it onto the page. And I'm telling the story, and one young woman says, "Oh, so that's where cut and paste came from."
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks. I do want to turn to artificial intelligence now, because there is so much to talk about there. I think most of you probably know that the Authors Guild organized a lawsuit against OpenAI. For full disclosure, we just filed on Tuesday night with a bunch of a lot of authors who are here are signed on as plaintiff representatives. So, and with the Authors Guild, it's been a tsunami of work around artificial intelligence. I think everybody in the creative fields feels that way, that it's just, there's so much that we're learning so quickly. It's so hard to keep up. I mean, I know I try to keep up with sort of what's happening with AI, as well as, we're lobbying for legislation. We've put together a coalition of creator groups because all creators are sort of, really feel like this is an existential threat. We've been so busy, but one of the sources I have for keeping up is, fortunately, I've had a subscription to Wired magazine, I think, since it started. Because
really?
I started my career doing intellectual property and technology. And back in the days when, if you wanted to have internet access, you had to open up your computer and, actually put in a modem yourself. But I'm so glad I had a Wired subscription, because I started getting all these articles about AI that were so informative, most of which are written by Stephen. It's really amazing, the reporting, just the amount of reporting that you've done on artificial intelligence. And I know you've been covering AI for years. So I guess I'd like to start by just asking, you would say it's a field that's 70 years old. So why are we talking about it now all of a sudden with the release of GPT and the other generative AIs, and how big a deal is it?
Sure. Well, the artificial intelligence field was born at a conference in Dartmouth in 1956, right? And they thought in a few years, again, it's another one of those, in the short term, we're going to nail it. We'll have human level intelligence, within 10 years, of course. It turns out that's a pretty hard benchmark to accomplish. And in part because computers weren't that powerful then, and in part because they attempted to sort of deconstruct, reverse engineer what they thought intelligence might be as like a bunch of rules. And it was really hard to do, and that really wasn't the way we do it, the way our brains work. So after a certain period of time, people were able to do some things. The machines could learn various things, but things kind of came to a halt and plateaued, and went into this period they called AI winter, where there wasn't really significant progress being made. But in the aughts, and maybe like a little before that, there were some people who saw opportunity, because computers are a little more powerful, to implement these things called neural nets, which sort of mimic the way the brain operates, in some ways. It's not really biological duplication, but in the spirit of the way our neurons work, they created these neural networks, and particularly some people in Toronto figured out the way to make them very effective, and that sort of pushed the field forward. So when people realized what was happening around 2010, the big companies started implementing this stuff, and you saw like a big leap in how these places were able to operate and make things more efficient. So things, you mentioned Uber, how Uber arranges, figures out like, where the closest, vehicle is to you, and, and how to figure out how high to charge the surge prices. That's part of that. And how to do translation from one language to another became much, much easier using these techniques. And so that became more effective. And it was all happening under the hood. People couldn't see it. In 2017, some people at Google came up with a paper called Transformers, and to be able to do it much more effectively. But it's interesting, there were 8 co-authors of that paper at Google, and they tried to get Google to implement that breakthrough and create what we now know as generative AI, to have these large language models that can speak like humans, and write essays and take in this huge amount of information. But Google was slow to act, mainly because this might threaten their business model for the way they work now. Searching with a generative AI bot isn't the same as searching in the search field, which sends you to websites, and they have websites advertised, and and it's a very lucrative model for Google, and if Google switched to something else, it might not make as much money. Not one of those 8 authors works at Google now. And people at OpenAI saw this paper, and they were quick to understand how this could really help them build these models, where you could talk to them and they could answer back, and take in an incredible amount of information and give you a complete answer within seconds of the most obscure question. And so it really catapulted the field when OpenAI came across with an interface that was so easy to use, and all the advances that had been under the hood were suddenly exposed to us. This happened just last November, right? So it seemed like overnight.
Not even a year. Yeah.
Yeah, overnight it seemed like, oh my God, we have intelligence. The Turing test, which is a way to say whether we've reached the plateau where AI is like really smart, and really like a human, seemed to be fulfilled at that moment, and people went nuts, and you could never trust the college essay again, and or a resume, or and a lot of people felt their jobs were at risk, and and everything was up for grabs. So we're in this combination of excitement and panic. I talked to someone just a couple days ago, who was studying this from academic field, and they said it really is a mix of excitement and angst, right, in that field, and I think for everyone now.
Yeah, well, you even hear that from the AI developers themselves, and even Sam Altman, when he testified in front of the Senate a couple months ago, he expressed that there's a ton of opportunity with AI, but he also said this field needs to be regulated because there are a lot of potential dangers. So this is the cover story of this week's Wired, and this is you can't see this deer. Excuse me. Dear AI overlords, don't F***CK this up. And we have high schoolers here, so sorry, I don't want to use the word. This is a really good article, and you did a lot of research for it. I think you spent something like a week or something almost with.
Well, I spent a few days at the office there. I went to London and followed Sam Altman around, and obviously talked to a lot of people both inside and outside the company.
Yeah, and it's a really, really fascinating article, and it's also a little mind blowing. I mean, you talk about how their mission is to build eventually what's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. But that's part of their mission. The other part is to make it safe for humanity. But then you do note that, well, when you talk to folks there, they're mainly focused on the part of the mission, which is building the AGI rather than the safety.
No, I think they're focused on both, but they're really excited about building superintelligence.
Yeah.
Right? And, can I say, well, I'm not going to call it a cult, but there are aspects, and I would ask them, can someone work for OpenAI, who didn't believe in that mission, right? And they say, well, I guess, but why would they do that, right? And, because
Right.
that really is what they're focused on. That they believe it's going to happen. And, because Sam Altman told me why he, wound up co-founding, this company with Elon Musk, and now leads it. And he was considering also running for governor of California at the time. I don't know if he would have made it, but
He was young.
who knows? But he said, well, AGI is only going to be built once, right? And I want to be part of that, right? He didn't say whether it will be built. He said it will be built once, and I went in.
Yeah. You also quote that they said that the employees there assume that AI will surpass whatever peak human biology can attain, which is interesting. So they want an intelligence that's greater than any human intelligence, but that the company's financial documents actually even stipulate an exit contingency for when AI wipes out our economic system. So that's one of the dangers. I think we all find this a little or a lot disturbing, and I wonder, why are they so motivated to build this super intelligence when there are so many risks, and they know those risks better than the rest of us do?
Yeah, well, I mean, for one thing, down to the last of them, they read science fiction in their formative years and were really excited by it and felt that was, that future was a great place to be. And then, the advances I was just talking about, put these things within reach. A lot of people now like to point out, what GPT, ChatGPT, GPT-4, and these other things, what they can't do, and how they could write a college essay, but it's not a great college essay. It's like a C maybe, and they could take the law boards and do well, at them, and they say, well, that's just a test. But at every step of artificial intelligence, people said, that it really can't do that. So how cool is it? At one point they said, it can play chess, but it can't be the world champion. And then it beat the world champion. So then the goalposts moved somewhere else. And now, if you look what it does, it is amazing. But of course, there's a lot of things that it can't do. But the next big breakthrough, it'll probably be able to do whatever benchmark we're putting up there now. So this is now possible. And that excites those people. There's a subset of those people, and I don't say everyone at OpenAI feels this, but there's a subset of people who are AI enthusiasts that believe that our role on Earth as humans is to pass the torch to some super intelligent entity, and we'll be remembered fondly as the ones who, built those machines, which later on would be able to build themselves and build the next even smarter iteration.
Thanks. So, those of us who care about literature and the arts find this all a little, dystopian. And one issue that a lot of people talk about, sort of why we are suing OpenAI is it's so easy. And we're on GPT-4 now, which we all know even GPT-5 is going to be that much better at writing and writing books and mimicking what it's ingested. So as most of you probably know, the way generative AI works is that it needs to be trained, quote unquote, or memorize a lot of content. This is particularly true for text, for large language models. And so when you prompt it for an output, it pulls from a lot of different sources. But all it can create now under the current generative AI is really just sort of a mashup of what's been written before. And right now, if any of you have used GPT, you'll see, limited to, what was available. They sometimes give a date in 2021 or January 2022 now. So it doesn't even know what's going on recently. It doesn't have access to, a lot of information. All it does is rehash what's been before. So it can't create anything really new, and it doesn't have any connection to the real world. It can't reflect human emotions, our thoughts, our inspiration, that sort of thing. So people talk about it. It can get very close to mimicking writers' work, and it could serve as a replacement. One of the things we talk about in our suit is the fact that for a lot of fiction writers, where they've created whole universes of characters like George Martin, it's people are writing books and stories using those worlds, using those characters. And as you might imagine, the authors are very upset by that. And, there will also be economic consequences in that some of the markets will shift to these AI-generated books. But with the kind of AI we have now, generative AI, can never really capture, can never match human writing. It could never be literature. We have a couple
The word
plaintiffs.
never is doing a lot of work there.
Sorry?
The word never is doing a lot of work there.
Well, that's right. So that's my question. But that's based on the kind of generative AI that exists now. So I want you to, will generative AI ever be able to sort of get beyond what now they call the uncanny valley between what AI can write and what a human can write or create? Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think
what's the future
that really
look like?
is the great question. So, you say right now it's just like a mashup, right? But there are things that these things do which mystify even the creators. There's this term called zero shot. And that means when the people making these things discover that the large language models can, take on a domain that they were never trained to do, and it turns out they're pretty good at, right? So just by scooping up, I think, I'm thinking, that could be wrong on this, but my memory, but I think maybe 1.7 trillion, variables is in GPT-4.
Right.
Like a trillion is like a pretty big number. There's so much stuff in there that it turns out that even though it might not be programmed to do something, it masters some field that they never thought it would do. And one of the key guys at OpenAI told me when he first started using this thing is he would stay up at night and he couldn't believe it. Why, we didn't teach it that, what? And but the highest bar, I'd say, is exactly what you described, Mary, is can it reach the pinnacle of human creation? And I wonder, the big question I have, is can it make a piece of music that has soul, right? The people who spend their lives in, the recording industry, and the golden ears, they could tell, wow, that has it, right? That piece of music, that's got soul, right? Van Morrison, don't you know it's got soul? Can an AI do that convincingly? Can that slip by us and you listen to that and you get that feeling when the, an exuberant, fantastic, rhapsodic piece of music can do that? I don't know. We've had some great writers on stage here already. Can an AI do that? Can an AI, write a novel like,
It can write novels, but
but can it write a novel? Like,
yeah, some of our
Roxana
literary writers
does
have
this,
said
or
they can't write.
Yeah, the people who were on stage before, who wrote, those great novels from their heritage, with their emotion, can it do that? That is an open question to me. I don't think they could ever have the same emotions a person could have, but just like they can, create content. I don't want to use the word mimic even, but just come up with content that's convincing in other ways. Can they do, what humans can they produce what humans can produce? Can they reach that if they're trained to do that? If that's the goal in trying to optimize those things, those pinnacles of art and creation, can they do that? And that, to me, is an open question that I don't know the answer to. Certainly, we have an existence proof that that can happen because we do it, right? And it's a mystery how we do it. So can that mystery be duplicated? I don't know. But I do know that it's a mistake to be complacent in thinking, oh, look what GPT-4 can't do now. We're safe.
Yeah, no,
because
I completely agree with
we're in
that.
the baby stage here.
Yeah, I call this the infancy.
Yeah.
We're not even in the toddlerhood yet.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the future of literature? Given how, small question, given how much cheaper, easier it is to say faster, with more advanced AI, write this book for me. Are publishers going to start doing that instead of going to human writers? Right now, they're telling us, oh my God, no. We need humans. We believe in human creation. We're going to support human creation. But I can see a day where, publishers, all the industries and various content businesses are, they're companies. They've got to turn profits. And will competitive pressures drive them to use AI? And of course, that's what we at the Authors Guild are trying to prevent through trying to get legislation, et cetera. But that question still looms.
Well, it's kind of interesting. And Sam Altman, in our discussions, told me, he said, I used to think that when we tackle AI, the first things to do, we would be able to do is things that like blue collar workers do, right? The people doing physical work and the, kind of like mid-level intellectual work, like transcribing or things like that, that might come next. And then would come other kind of knowledge worker kind of tasks. And, the creativity would be the top of, the peak. He said that it's somewhat reversed now. Now, probably the hardest thing to do would be to do blue-collar work because, robotics and kind of manipulating your way around the physical world is so much more difficult to do, in a robotic sense. Like a dog can do is like really, really hard to do. We're not as close to being a dog as we are to being, someone working in an office. So he said, but still we haven't gotten to the creativity part. I think what's happening, if I take a step back, look, I'm a writer. I don't want to be displaced. I want to be paid for my work, right? But if you look at it in the larger context, we're just one of many, many working categories that have to worry about what this wave means to our jobs, right? We're lucky because it is tough, and again, it's an open question whether they can write really great novels. But for now, we're okay. But in the long term, everything's up for grabs. We don't know how this ends.
Yeah, I will say, obviously it's something that we argue all the time, but I really, really believe this in my heart and soul, something we talk to Congress about, is that, yes, I know the Silicon Valley loves to say, oh, well, yeah, so writers will lose their jobs. More musicians and songwriters will lose their job because that industry's already been killed. And that's just too bad, like the truck drivers. Well, that's not just, oh, too bad, those people will have to get retrained, because we as a society will lose out so much by losing. If you can't make money writing anymore, then we're going to lose writers. And it doesn't, you know, the Authors Guild does these surveys of authors' incomes every 5 years, and our most recent survey shows that the median income for authors, full-time authors, from their writing, all writing, books and teaching, writing and editing, and all writing-related sources, speaking, is $20,000 a year. That's the median. So half of full-time writers are earning less than that. What that means is that for a lot of writers, book writers, they can't take much loss of income before they do something else. And then we lose writers, existing writers from the field. Young people who want to become writers see there's no money to be made, they don't enter. And books have a different place in society as it's journalism than, you know, I think a lot of other types of jobs where it's, you know, our democracy relies on free speech, on discourse. Books, I think, are the prominent way that we communicate long-form thinking, that people understand ideas, you know, portray ideas and really dig into them. And so I think it's a culture crisis. This isn't, you know, this isn't just loss of jobs, it's a loss of culture. And human beings have had arts and storytelling since we've been human beings. And I think that's something we all really need to be thinking about and making sure that we preserve that, because who are we if we don't have our own storytelling and arts anymore?
Let me ask a question to the audience. What if you read a novel and you really enjoyed it, and then later found out, after you read it, that wasn't written by a human, it was written by some artificial intelligence program? Would you feel duped? What?
Raise your hand if
Raise
you
your
would.
hand.
I'm interested.
So that's maybe our protection, you know, that we don't want to be, you know, led down that path into thinking that we're connecting with a human who produced a piece of work when it wasn't. We want that connection. And if we're denied that connection, we won't take it.
Yeah, so I just want to put a pitch in for some of the work we're doing in DC. We are lobbying for a bill that would require all AI-generated content to be labeled as AI. We've seen iterations of the bill already, and the staffers are telling us that's, out of all the things we're asking for, that's most likely to go through. Amazon, we've been asking them since January, make it a requirement that books that are generated by AI be labeled as such. They're now collecting that information. I think they're going to start making that publicly available pretty soon. So that's a really good point. Is like ultimately, I mean, there are people who are like, yeah, it's cool, I want to, you know, read AI-generated stuff. But I think most of us want to feel a connection to another human being.
Right, that's it. When you hear a piece of music or read a piece of literature that's got that soul, we're connecting with what it, you know, what's meaningful to us, right?
Yeah.
And you know, as much as I can get excited about AI, I want us to keep that.
Yeah, thanks. So I see Lynn.
Yeah, we're going to go to Q&A. But
And I have one more question I have to ask, but we'll go to audience questions first.
first, okay. Okay, right here in the front row.
I'm a painter, and AI has impacted several art sites very heavily already. And one of the questions that comes up in this artwork, it has to do with intellectual property. Who owns the artwork? Is it the person who puts in the prompts? Is it the person who wrote the original program that goes searching for the prompts to assemble together into a final product? Or is it the person who looks like the image? For instance, Angelina Jolie's face is very popular right now. So does she have a legal recourse to say, you're using my face?
I mean, I can probably.
Yeah, Mary's the lawyer.
You need to repeat the question for the recording.
Okay, so the question is, the questioner is an artist and seeing a lot of use of AI to create new images. And the question is, who owns those images that are AI generated? And what about using other people's identities, such as Angelina Jolie's face, in AI-created images. So there's been a lot of conversation about these issues, and without getting too into the weeds, which I'm way too into the weeds of the copyright law, but the first thing you need to know is that right now, anything that is solely AI generated has no copyright, okay? That has been, the Copyright Office has said that. I think, reviewing all the past law, we've certainly been saying that for about 4 years. We've been writing papers talking about AI. There is, under current law, there is no copyright in something that is generated by AI. Okay, and when you talk about ownership, I think, who owns an image, you're talking about copyright ownership. So but the way a lot of AI generated works are actually produced is it's an interaction between the user and the AI technology. And that's where it's going to take some years for the law to figure out if something has AI assistance, what in it exactly in it is copyrightable or not. The Copyright Office for now is saying it is, anything that's solely AI generated is not copyrightable to the extent a human being adds to it or puts an image in that is the start, that you put an image in and say do such and such to it. They own that image, so there are aspects of it. And when you go to register, this is too technical, but you can register your copyrights, and they're saying you have to just disclaim anything that was completely AI generated. And there was a recent court case that agreed with that, saying if something's completely AI generated, no copyright. Now, using other people's face, fortunately, we do have existing law that helps with that, the right of publicity law. So if you're creating Angelina Jolie's face using AI for news purposes, to do an article on, image generation or something like that, in a way that's considered kind of a fair use, that's okay. But if you're creating her image to go out and sell it for commercial gain in any way, that's a violation. So you are going to start seeing a lot of these lawsuits. And I know in the recording industry, right now, that's their #1 concern, because we're seeing famous musicians' artwork, music being taken, and their sort of copies of it being done, and also their identities. And that's kind of an easier case. So recently, of Jane Friedman, who is an author consultant, she writes a lot of blogs, and she's written some books. She found on Amazon Kindle there were 5 books posted by Jane Friedman on the topics that she writes on all the time. And she bought them before we got Amazon to take them down, and it was like all based on her stuff. So, there's some outputs that, as Steve said, they maybe pull from a lot of different places, but if you say, write me a book, based on like how to get published or how to market your book by Jane Friedman, it will pull just from Jane Friedman. And she said it was uncanny how much of her voice was in those books. Oh, there's a lot of questions.
The high school students have questions. Any hands up there? We want to give you. Okay, all right, they're just listening.
There's a hand up there.
There's a hand up there? No, I think he's doing this, like the thinker. Deep thoughts. How about the woman on the end here in the... You, yeah.
So I'm an author, I write novels, and I'm trying, scared to what we're talking about, but I'm trying to grasp, I'm trying to refer to the past. Is there any other moments in history that you felt like this? I mean, photography scene, did everyone think that art was dead when you started pictures? Or, so I'm just trying to make some kind of something related to something so that I don't feel like the lights get taken over. Because obviously photography became an art form.
Okay.
So the question is, if I understood this correctly, that is this, she's a novelist, and is this like things in the past where, for instance, when photography came along, artists were concerned that they would be put out of business. Is there hope that even with AI, that literature will still flourish?
Well,
Sorry if I paraphrase.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't know. I think, every new technology comes along and people say, oh, now everything is different, right? And the world has changed, right? Every day in my inbox, I get these pitches and saying, our product is going to change the world. But, I think this really is different in a way. And I do think, generally, we do get through these things. We do figure out where they stand there. I think we're going to have to do a lot more work in this case to be able to get that equilibrium of, how to live with this new technology. You're absolutely right. In the past, everything from the printing press to, cameras and things like that, threatened artists, and it could be that everything will wind up to be a collaboration between, people. Maybe we'll provide the emotion to what these things do in terms of churning out prose. That's an optimistic way of looking at things. So, yeah, it could happen.
How about up here? The man in the blue shirt, do you have your hand up?
Me. Okay, I think, yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious, this got referred to, how optimistic or what are the possibilities that law and regulation, which tend to be imperfect and not very nuanced tools, might help?
The question is, to what extent can law and regulation, which is usually imperfect and not nuanced, help?
Yeah, I think they could help in certain ways. We already shown just in this room, we want to know when an AI is doing something. I think there's almost a consensus among the companies and what seems to be in Congress that that's something that is realistic. I think what isn't realistic is to say, you can't go there when you talk about what these programs can do. A lot of people, felt that they could pass laws that limit the internet's impact on certain things. Like technology is like a raging river that just can't be dammed up very easily. And even if in one country you wind up coming up with really draconian laws like limiting what AI can do, some other country is going to do it. Someone's going to open source, an LLM, and people are going to figure out how to, put in things in their data sets that are banned for public companies, and so we're going to have to live with whatever these things are able to do. So there's, I think there's things can do that legislation could do, regulation could do, but the idea that this technology could be bottled up and not march on to make a profound impact of our lives, no way that's going to be bottled up.
I just want to say we're just about done, but this is such a great conversation, and we have set the tent up right behind the Playhouse. It's a big, beautiful tent with about, a dozen tables, and if you want to have a little breakout session, that's what we have it for, to grab a cup of coffee, continue the discourse among yourselves. And Mary, she's my boss. I have to give her the last question. So.
Well, I have to ask this, unrelated to AI, but yeah, I shouldn't speak for Stephen, but I'm sure you're happy to have people ask you questions afterwards, because this is such a fascinating topic, and there's so much we still need to learn. But I have to ask you, how did you find Einstein's brain?
What?
Yeah.
Could we didn't
How
hear you.
did you find Einstein's brain?
Yeah, I found Einstein's brain. I was, working as a young reporter for a magazine in New Jersey, and my editor said, I want you to find Einstein's brain. It was in 1978, I believe, 23 years after Einstein died. When he died, his brain was removed from his body, ostensibly for a study. and then it disappeared. No one knew what happened to it. There were no studies done, and my editor said, go find it, and it'll be our August cover. And there was no Google. I couldn't find, look that up. But I figured out who had it, and I, went to that person who first was very evasive, and he was in Wichita, Kansas. It was the pathologist who had removed it from Einstein's head, and it turned out he was not a researcher. He had no idea how to do a study to find out what the purpose would be of the study, to see if Einstein's brain, the brain of a genius, would be any different than a, quote, normal brain. And, he had a case of researcher's block, I guess, and couldn't come up with it, and he had the brain himself. So I went to see him in his office, which was, like kind of a blood lab where, people go and, give blood and they do the samples. It wasn't a research lab. And I'm sitting talking to him on a Saturday in this otherwise empty lab, trying to get him to talk about this, which he was reluctant to do. And then, he started talking about it, and, well, I knew Einstein, and I did take the brain out, and I did have it. And I finally, I get frustrated. Can I look a picture of it? And he said, well, it's actually here. And he walks behind me. There's a cardboard box that says Costa Cider, and there's like 2 big jars he takes out, and the brain's all cut up in sections. And there's like Einstein's brain, like bobbing up and down in these jars in front of me. And I'm like stunned. Whoa, there it is, relativity. And so I write about it, and AP picks it up. And it's a giant story. Johnny Carson's making jokes about it. It's in every radio show and newspaper. People are camped out on this poor guy's lawn. The Einstein estate goes crazy because they want no sensational publicity about a body part of Einstein. But it actually turns out that this leads some researchers to contact the guy and actually do some study on Einstein's brain. So I gave Einstein's brain a second life.
Awesome.
Thank you all so much. We're going to come back here at 3 o'clock for 2 novelists who do not write their work with AI. Maya Shanbog Lang, who's written a novel and a memoir of her mother, as well as Emma Straub. So we'll see you at 3.